Hey, 7th graders, Mr. Allard with another one of our flipped lessons. Today, we're going to kind of talk about a condensed version of the causes of the American Revolution. We're going to use the acronym CAR, C-A-R, to talk about them for pretty much the rest of our unit. But some things you should have in front of you. If you are one of our hybrid model students who comes into the classroom, you received a CAR graphic organizer with a front and a back. So you should make sure you have that. If you are one of our remote students, you're going to want to make sure you have your OneDrive assignment loaded on Schoology so you can kind of go back and forth and complete your notes in the guided notes section there. As always, pause button is your friend. So once you get a slide pop up, hit pause, jot down your notes, press play, listen to the lecture, and then at the end of each slide, answer that multiple choice question. You should be getting a 5 out of 5 on this assignment. All right, let's get going. Make myself smaller here. There we go. All right, first up is the Proclamation of 1763. We're going to talk a little bit about this in class as well, but this was a result of the French and Indian War. So for about 7 years before the American, or from about 1754 to 1763, not all of that was fighting. Some of that was negotiating a treaty. Britain and France were basically fighting for control of North America, and they were fighting with their Native American allies. For the British, that was the Iroquois. For the French, that was the Algonquin. For control of pretty much, really what they wanted to control was what is called the Ohio River Valley, where the state of Ohio is today. Britain winds up winning the war and basically gets all of French territory in North America, the Ohio River Valley, and the and parts of Canada. So the colonists are thinking, awesome, we get to expand west. At this point, about 90% of the colonists are farmers, so they can start to expand in this new territory. But Britain has got two big problems kind of going into after this war. Number one, they're hugely, hugely in debt. So they have to figure out a way to make money to pay for this war. Number two, they have a Native American group who expects them to help them. So they see this new land as a possible way to solve both of these issues. First thing they do is in the Proclamation of 1763, the British Parliament, kind of like their governing body, like our Congress of today, decides to basically say no colonists can move west of the Appalachian Mountains. That's going to make some Native American groups happy because that's basically where they are living at this point, and meaning there will be no more colonists in their territory. So basically Britain is saying thank you for helping us during the war. Another reason why they're saying this is they can better organize that land into things that they can sell, into plots, into things they can sell back to the colonies or the colonists, and hopefully expand, hopefully kind of pay down that debt. This makes the colonists super duper mad, and really the only reason why they don't get really, 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 really mad at it is because there's absolutely no way Britain can enforce this. This border is thousands of miles long. They're not building a border wall. They're not manning it with troops. There's very, very few places where they can actually stop the colonists. So basically, they're unable to enforce the Proclamation of 1763, which again leads to some issues with Native American groups. But the colonists are upset by the initial issue, but then with the lack of enforcement, they're able to pretty much do whatever they want. The Stamp Act of 1765 is one, and let me just get myself out of the way here, trying to find some blank spots for me to go. There's a series of acts, again, remember, because Britain is in such debt, they create a series of acts that create taxes that are hoping to increase their revenue, and the British kind of, why they're doing this is they're basically telling the colonists is, hey, look, we fought a war to basically protect you and expand the colonies. Yes, you helped fight us, but you should also help pay for that war. And at this point, the colonists are not paying as high taxes as people in Britain, even though they are technically at this point still British citizens. Basically, if a colonist is paying $1 a tax on, or if a citizen in Britain is paying about $1 in tax, the colonists are paying about 27 or about 25 cents or a quarter. Um, these taxes really did not raise taxes that high. And really, what the colonists were angry at is they did not have any representation in the parliament. They had nobody that was from the colonies there to vote on those bills and that or on those acts, and that was really the problem. And they used this term "no taxation without representation." And and Parliament, to its credit, kept trying to do this. The colonies would boycott, petition, and eventually those acts would be repealed. They tried to place a tax on sugar. They tried to place a tax on imported goods. They tried to place a tax on tea. But the real big one that really got under the colonists' nerves was the Stamp Act. Reason why is this was a tax on all paper products. And during this time period, 1765, everything was on paper. That would be like, having an electronics tax today and having a tax every time you used your cell phone, your iPad, or whatever. It was something that people used every single day in multiple times. And it was called the Stamp Act because, as you can see on the slide there, there's some primary source of what the stamp looked like. Basically, you paid your tax, you got a stamp on that paper. And you can see how the colonists kind of felt about that as they changed that into kind of the skull and crossbones, kind of like a poison. There was a lot of colonial protests to this one, starting to boycott, not paying the stamp, refusing to pay for it, and really the Stamp Act only lasted about a year before it was repealed. Boston Massacre of 1770. This was basically the result of colonial protests increased with everything that's going on. There was increased troops in and around particularly Boston where a lot of these protests were happening, and more soldiers were sent to the colonies. March 5th, 1770, there was a group of protesters who were protesting in front of British soldiers. To this day, we are not exactly sure how it all went down. We have this primary source depiction that was created days after the Boston Massacre. What we do know is, for whatever reason, we do know that there were some snowballs and some sticks thrown at the British soldiers. We do know that there was some choice words being thrown back and forth. And we do know that at some point the British soldiers opened fire and sent a volley of bullets into the crowd, killing 6. The British soldiers were actually put on trial. A guy who will be pretty familiar in name a little bit later by the name of John Adams was their attorney, and they were found innocent of their crimes. And this drastically increased tensions in the colonies because many of these, for lack of a better term, during this time period, many colonists wanted these British soldiers hung for killing colonists. We're going to talk a little bit more about this depiction in class and kind of some of the issues surrounding it, but it was widespread throughout the colonies, and the Boston Massacre was kind of one of those that really, yes, it just happened in Boston, but people thought it could happen in just about any of the colonies. Boston Tea Party in 1773. It was the colonial response to the Tea Act, which was basically a tax on tea, even though really the tax on tea, British tea, was still cheaper than the tax that was placed on the imported tea. And import means any good coming into the country, and export means any good coming out. So basically, why would Britain put a tax on goods coming into the country? Because British goods didn't count as that. So when somebody went to the market, they would see British tea at $1 and maybe Dutch tea was 75 cents. Well, now with the tax, Dutch tea would be maybe $1.75 because it was an imported good, and people would be um, more probably going to buy more British tea. However, the big problem with this wasn't necessarily the tax, because again, British tea was already cheaper. It was the fact that the Parliament was basically giving a monopoly or kind of sole ownership of the tea industry to Britain, and basically that kind of wiped out any competition from any other company. And we'll talk a little bit more about this in class. It's a little bit complicated for seventh graders to kind of wrap their head around. But we'll kind of discuss it a little bit. And what worried the colonists was, if they could do this about tea, what's going to stop them from doing this with every product? And soon they're not going to be able to get products from other places. And most of the time, those goods from France or Spain or other countries were cheaper than the goods coming from Britain. And they could sell their goods there and make more money. So colonists dressed up as Native Americans and basically went into the tea that was held by the British in the harbor and dumped them out. It was about 342 chests of tea were damaged, basically wiping out the supply. In today's money, this was about somewhere in the neighborhood of $2 to $3 million in damages. So this was a big, big, big protest and a big, big deal. As a result, talking about cause and effect, the effect of the Boston Tea Party was the passage of the Intolerable Acts, or as Britain called them, the Coercive Acts. They were coerced into doing them by colonial action. And this is where we start to see kind of the straw breaking the camel's back between relationships between Britain and the colonies. Again, it's Britain's response to the Boston Tea Party. It's basically a five-step process. They're going to close the Boston port and not let any trade happening. Boston at the time was the busiest trade city in the colonies, so that's going to have a huge economic impact, not just on Boston and Massachusetts, but all of the colonies. The Massachusetts Assembly, their government, was not allowed to meet anymore because they thought that was, how they were kind of planning this attack. There was a new quartering act, which basically meant that British soldiers could stay in the colonials' homes, and the colonists had to kind of pay for that. No trials of anyone who was British. If they get in trouble in the colonies, they are sent over to England to face trial. And there was this thing called the Quebec Act, where it basically said that Quebec is going to be separate from the American colonies and kind of its own thing. That actually kind of saved Quebec from being a part of what is going to come with the American Revolution. But this outraged all of the colonies because they saw this as, yes, a lot of these issues were kind of Boston and Massachusetts issues. But more and more of these issues, particularly the coercive acts, we saw some things with the Stamp Act and things like that, that were things that impacted all of the colonies. Up until this point, most of the tension could be seen as a Britain versus Massachusetts problem. But this is going to start to impact the rest of the 13 colonies and is going to start that kind of snowball effect to the only way we're going to really solve this issue is through the American Revolution. Well, that's our discussion of the initial causes. Obviously, that's not all the causes, but that's the causes that we are going to study in depth for the next couple of class periods. If you have any questions, as always, hit me up on Schoology. Went a little bit over our typical time, but you got plenty of time to work on this at home. And till next time, 7th graders, out it out.